This conference will now be recorded.
I'm gonna go text it. I don't have phone there. I'm gonna text. I'll make sure that she can hear. Lauren, did you have a password?
We had trouble last meeting, so we don't want to do that again. I'll do it right now.
What's the question? What about, do you have a password?
I'm connected, I don't know.
Oh. I haven't, I'll go back and get it. Thank you.
Lori, this is a question, can she hear this?
Yeah, can you hear us?
She wouldn't be able to yet, but she could have started.
I did, I started it, and I've already hit record, so it should be recorded. I don't know if anybody else is
And you
on.
can't officially start it until 6:30. Just, you know,
Oh,
because that's
okay.
what that.
Is it 6:30?
No.
My bad. Started it.
You just want to make it recording. Well, you want me just to do the recording?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And the mayor's not on yet, just so you know, so she wouldn't be able to. She'll hop on.
I'm gonna go get the password and come back.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And this morning, that's all you needed from me, right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all you needed from me, so I just.
I think it's done everything else I need. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, 100 phone calls.
So I drove all the way into San Antonio when I talked to you to go get a Big Mac for y'all and a Big Mac for the audience.
Didn't happen there.
No, they couldn't support our plan.
No,
We
really?
did it to Adobe, they still couldn't support it. So I drove all the way through.
Oh, my Lord.
But you got one, so.
So there's the guy who made you talk to. He's gonna put this one up for us and he can help you with that. We want to thank Fred first of all. for coming tonight. I'm just looking for the color code. Yeah, I want to speak, you need to sign in.
If you want to speak, just. Oh. Well, if she can't even get in with the meeting.
Oh. I mean, thank you. I mean, I'm not even there yet, but I've got the. Thank you very much.
Do you want to drive?
It's just spinning, I don't know why, it's just spinning. Planning and zoning commission to order at 6:29.
Chairman Moore? Can you give the city secretary another minute or two to see if she can get online? This is an important one. I want to see.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
she's just spinning. Let me see if I can get connection. Connected.
You have it connected? Okay.
It's connected.
Okay, we have to try again.
Planning and zoning commission is now open, 6:30 p.m. I'll open the regular meeting to, and we call to order at 6:30 to establish a quorum. Anderson? Here. Perkins? Carlson?
Here.
Rich?
Here.
And Moore. Do we have a quorum? Are there any announcements? Are there any public comments?
Yes,
Not for the map, just.
not just public comments. Okay. Almost.
I do have one announcement when I get ready to open the public hearings. The public hearing is on the proposed 2021 zoning map. The Planning and Zoning Commission endeavored to follow all procedural requirements in the notice, consideration and adoption of the proposed new zoning map back in June. However, out of abundance of caution, the map is being considered for action again after new written notices of this meeting have been mailed out to all Blanco residents in the utility bill. A link to the city website with the new map was provided in the written notice, and a copy of the proposed map is and has been available for the public at City Hall. Additional notice has been provided in the newspaper and on the agenda for this meeting, so we have reached as many people as possible. Because we want full public notice and participation, we took this step to make sure all residents of Blanco have been notified by all means, and as many residents as possible attend and participate in these meetings. So somebody just grab that paper so we can see if anybody wants to speak. Thank you. Okay, so, first up, the public hearing is to consider approval of the proposed 2021 citywide zoning map amendment. Planning and zoning proposed the 2021 zoning map. So, we have, people that want to speak on this, and so Matt Herman, you're first on the list.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Am I supposed to turn this on? or-
Yes, please, somebody turn that.
How about that? Do you hear me now?
Yeah, everybody put that-
Like the old phone commercials? Can you hear me now?
Move it up. There you go.
One more time?
Now we.
Now we're talking. All right, I'll be pretty quick. I had most of this printed out, so I didn't fumble and stumble. But according to the Blanco's UDC section 5.1, your proposal, if I'm clear about this, it lays out R5, you say that it's 5 units per acre, and R4 is 20 units per acre. And then R3 again is 5 units per acre. R2 would be 3 units per acre, and R1 is 1 unit or a house per acre. Am I right? So forth. I copied it right off of it, so I hope I'm right. And then in chapter 4 of the USD, you describe R5, it's a high density buffer zone between residential and non-residential housing, which, you know, it's buffer zone between commercial properties. I can understand that. I know that's like, you got 6 blocks over here between Mesquite and Elm Street, 5th and 3rd, that are all, I don't know what that's, I'm not gonna ask for an explanation. I just had a curiosity about it. R4, it states that you allow smaller and more financially accessible dwelling units than residential districts. And R3 is a high density district to provide the densest residential development possible for Blanco, and is typically nearest the center of the city. And then you list R2, it's a medium density intended to include land subdivided for residential purposes, and generally it's serviced by public infrastructure. And then last but not least, you have R1. It's where you have 1 unit per acre, and the lot may or may not be serviced by city infrastructure and is retained for urban growth. And Blanco's USD states typically these lots are the farthest from the city center. My property, which you have listed as R1, is very much inside the city. I'm only like 3 little city blocks from the courthouse. My whole point tonight, though, is that the public hearing is to request the commission to change my piece of property from, I don't know why you've got it this way, but half of it's R1 and then half of it's R2. And I'd like to see if you could take the whole body of it and make it an R2 or even an R3. And that would be more in line and more in conjunction with places like Calico Meadows, which you have as R3, and my neighbors to the south, which is also R3. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Hurd.
You betcha.
Mike Smith.
Well, I'll start out with a comment, and it's thank you to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I have an idea how much work you put in on this, and as a citizen, I really appreciate it. I mean, our map, you've addressed some critical issues that were on the map. The mixed use, I never really understood. So this helps me out with that. And I do have 2 comments on the map, and I've shared this with your chair previously. And I believe the city staff has gotten her some documentation, and that would be a lot on 4th Street that is zoned half residential and half commercial. The lot line does not exist. It just had about 50% of the lot in one zoning, and the other, there had been a previous city council meeting probably back in 18 where this was voted on, and it just never got transferred onto the map. And so that was item 1. Item 2 is in the last year or year and a half, we have taken a parcel of land out of the city limits as council, and that was done in part of the settlement agreement on a lawsuit. And if those changes could be made, I thought it would be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Smith. Callan McNett.
Good evening. The main question I have is for the yellow, the high density residential, and for a couple reasons. My one question is, when developers or people that want to subdivide lots or anything like that come in, where can we find some guidance for them as far as what is the city looking for in particular places like that? I know there's multiple properties that even as I'm working at the bank and places like that, that I get approached. Well, what does Blanco want? Just so that cohesiveness between people buying the property and the planning and zoning committee can do something in favor of both the city, its community members, and putting it together in a fashion that it helps everyone involved. Is there some type of guidance that we could go to as far as what the city is looking for particular properties? Because I know there's one on the north side, there's another one on the south side of town that is that question of what does that high density look like, or do we just send plats in for the commission to consider, or is there a vision that y'all have for those particular properties?
Well, this is a public hearing, Mr.
Mhm.
McNabb, so we cannot have a conversation with you. We can listen to you and hear what you have to say, and then the commission can respond to you at a later time. But we cannot do that during the public hearing.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. I'm just pointing that out, that there's not a lot of guidance for these particular properties. And if there was something that we could put together for that, I think that would help everyone involved, especially for a bunch of the different
Thank you
zones.
for your comments. and
Yes,
we'll
ma'am.
certainly take that into consideration. So I don't have anyone else that has signed up to speak in the public hearing. So I will close the public hearing at 6:40.
You want to go ahead and open up back up
And
the record?
open the new business, the regular meeting. We have the new business that we have is going to be to discuss, consider, and possible action on the approval of the 2021 citywide zoning map amendment. So tonight, we wanted to look at some things that can come forward, and I have some things for your packet for us to have a discussion. We'll go over those in just a second. I would like to start with these issues, and then we can certainly have more discussion on whatever the commission would like to discuss. First, let's open up with, we have new members here. And so just because they're new and they were not here when the first zoning map, when we worked on the zoning map, I want to pass these out to each one of us. And so the only thing that I gave you just there was to just go to review the zoning map issues for those commissioners, particularly who were not here during the development of the map. The 2014 map is the basis for the proposed map. Any property on the 2014 map is on the proposed 2021 map. The city limits are the same. The only thing different is the zoning of the property. The proposed map is zoned by region, not by property, so we have to keep that in mind. Not everyone would like the zoning of the property, but after 2 years' work, the P&Z believe the zoning is fair and beneficial to the city. If the map is not approved, all residential property will remain R. And since MX is no longer valid zone, we will have a problem considering all property requests. Again, the proposed map lays down R1, R2, R3, R5 zones and eliminates the MX quadrat. Now, we've looked at the map, it's all colored for you. And so I just wanted you to have, especially the new members, all of the backup when we first began in January 2020 with the map, when we first approved, when we last approved the map in June 24th of 2021. So this brings you up to date from what you were not here when we actually worked on it. Now, with that in mind, the other thing that we need to talk about here is Mr. Smith, Councilman Smith, sorry, brought up the de-annexation. Now, I've given you a copy of that in your packet. It looks like this. And attached to that, you have the ordinance that in fact did de-annex that property. So is everybody seeing that and you want to comment on it? I mean, find that in your packet and you still here, ask our city council. Then the second item that we're going to have to discuss and come to agreement on is the 4th Street property, which you have in your packet, it's like this. And that property, if you look at the attachment, I pulled up the county property, and so it shows that to be one complete property. It shows it to be a complete property. So on the 2014 map, did you see that? On the 2014 map, that showed that as 2 flats. And so because we were working, we decided to read the information I gave you to begin with as to when we started working on the map. We said we would not split properties when we did this region. And so in that case, what we did is we split a property. And so we need to fix that in this map. So there's 2 things that we need to look at. The third and the last thing that I have, and somebody else brings something up, is the one that has the city limits on. Overline. And the only thing that happened there is it bled over past the city limits. Okay. So Councilor Smith brought those 2 items, the ordinance for the de-annexation and the 4th Street property to be corrected. So do we have any discussion on those 2 issues?
Makes sense.
All 3 seem pretty straightforward.
Pardon me?
All 3 seem pretty straightforward.
Okay, can I hear a motion that what we do with these 3 issues that we just discussed? Can we approve them? Is there a motion?
I will make a motion that we approve all 3 of these as proposed.
Second motion.
Okay, so Trey, can you fix those on the map so that the map would then be corrected to what we approved up to this point?
Isn't all
all three of these properties out here, or just the new one?
It's just that one blue one right there. I think attached to that, I showed you that it's the, attached to that shows that it's the, 13.82 acres.
Yes.
The block where the cursor bird is.
And I don't know how you move this there, I wish you would fix it there. And then that last one was just where the red over, the city limits there at Mesquite Street. Yeah, right there, that little one, it just red over, but that's out of the city limits.
I have a question. So the entire Mesquite Street is now is now a county road?
I don't know if it's county road or not. Mesquite Street is probably a city property.
But see, the city limit goes along the eastern boundary, so I just wanted
The
to.
only thing he's taking out is this property right here, just like the rest of it.
Yeah, say it holds, it has the,
Yes,
it has the
yes,
head of
yes.
Mesquite Street, so the whole thing is now a county street.
Can you zoom into that one more time, Craig, please? Isn't that the small triangle on the curve of the steep supposed to be part of the property, or is that outside?
And that was going by the GIS and they were provided by the county.
I mean, on the map that we were provided here, there is an angle through that line, not a straight line going.
Oh, that's the, you see it here too, it's the map deal, but. That's all it's.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Craig?
That the curve that he was talking about was just the Google road line and the actual road in the background.
Would it be possible for me to see the Fourth Street property again?
Yes, sir. Or, sorry, I should answer that.
I'm not supposed to talk, right? I didn't see that. Can I make a comment or?
No, sir, you can, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Live, we just make sure you get it on.
You come up here, you can talk to us, and we're not sitting here in a regular meeting now. We're out of the public hearing and into a regular meeting, so yes. I can hear you come up.
Okay. From what I understand, that property was sold for a dentist office, and right now it shows mixed use, is that correct? Not mixed use, buffer zone.
R5. It was according to the ordinance that was sent to me, that was zoned MX.
I'm sorry,
According to the ordinance that was sent to me, that changed that property, it was zoned MX property, which automatically becomes an R5 property.
R5, and R5 is commercial. R5 is buffer zone, correct?
Yes.
Would
And it
that-
can be, it's mixed use. It can be, if you read that, the R5, this can be residential and or light commercial.
Okay, so the sites that bought the lot, the owner of the lot that has the intent of building a dental clinic on it, they would still, it wouldn't require a zoning change for that to take place, is that correct?
He would, I guess he would have to come before, as the R5, he can have light commercial, and we'll have to look at that. And I believe, I want to say that the dental office is allowed. Let me just.
Okay, was that, I think it was, in the motion that was made at council, it stated they would be allowed to have their dental
I
office.
believe that's right. I think that in the zoning ordinance, he was allowed to have.
If you could verify that, I would appreciate it, and I'll sit down and try to be quiet.
Let me get to the.
I don't see what it says. It's going to be a dental.
Nobody has theirs. Office medical is permitted in the R5 zone.
Thank you.
I don't see anything specifically about a dental office though.
Office medical is.
Right, but in the,
Yeah, I would think that dental would be medical.
Yeah, so even if they didn't mention it specifically in there, it'd still be,
that's what I'm saying, but I was just looking for the actual reference to a dental office and I'm not seeing it in the documentation provided. So I was curious if I was missing something. I'll just said go from residential to mixed use to a property line error. Okay, I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. Thank you.
Okay, so the next piece of business is, Mr. Cody came forward and he doesn't agree with the way his property was zoned. And so, we have to remember that we zone by region and not by a particular property, because we would have invalidated the map if we done that. And so, when we look at his property,
Did we need to vote on the prior motion or are we still working on that motion?
You need to vote.
You know, second, that you didn't put it for a vote.
I'm sorry.
You didn't put it for a vote.
You have to vote in a second, but you need to put that for a vote.
Oh, we have a motion to second. Does anybody have any more discussion? Do you have agreement? Everybody agree? Thank you. In my mind, it passed. Okay, so now let's go back and we need to look over at Mr. Herbert's property.
May I?
Yes.
I just want to.
Again, out of an abundance of caution, because you had a public hearing, why don't you take a roll call vote for what you just did? For anything you do tonight, you take a roll call vote.
Okay. Okay, so let's take a roll call vote on the changes for, it's going to be the 4th Street property being made complete as an R5 property. The property at property number 1967, 13.83 acres, which is de-annexed on ordinance 2020-0-008. And the overlap of the bleeding over of the R5 coloring zone at Mesquite Street. So I need to get a roll call for each one. So I've never done this before. So Brandon, do you approve?
yes.
Is that the way I do that?
They just call each committee member's name and then they will say yes or no.
So Brandon,
Yes.
Kristen,
Yes.
Rob Blythe,
Yes.
Hines,
I approve.
and I approve. So it's a unanimous decision vote if that passes. Now, I want to go back to the property that Mr. Hearn brought up. We cannot designate a property that we would not have zoned when we were zoning the region. And I don't think that we can take one property that we decided when we were doing the citywide map and change that property.
Well, we have R3 right next to it.
Pardon me?
There's R3 right next to it. So it's not zoned, like it's not proximity wise far away from R3. It's touching it.
That's true, but
Right, for my benefit, would you be able to show which one this is?
It's this one.
Yeah, come up and help explain.
I'm asking for a city attorney opinion right now.
just a minute.
If I get it. I believe the answer is. Is there a copy of the comment? Try to get hold of it.
What chart are you looking at, Susan?
I'm sorry,
What chart are you looking at there? What chart?
5.1 lot standards.
5.1, okay. I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, we discussed this at all.
Yeah, we did discuss this, we just didn't have any conversations. I don't remember Just going to check to see, what she's checking on is to see if we can discuss any property.
So one of you,
Madam Chair, one of your committee members just spoke about, I believe, adjoining property. Is that designation as well? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so we were, okay, so in my understanding, when it was zoned, it was looking at the properties that are next to it. And with this being a large section of land with one house on it, it made sense to zone it appropriately to some of the others touching it. But it's also touching R3. So if the thought process is we should zone it according to the things around it, then I think this one just happens to fall in the likelihood of both. I mean, it's also touching mixed, or the R5.
And the attorney agrees with you.
You're saying you want it to be in R5?
No, I'm saying it's touching in R5, it's also touching in R3, and R3 would make sense by the standards you just read, in my thoughts. But I am definitely open to y'all's opinions.
I mean, if you probably measure the lines, you know, it's probably more R3 than the other.
R3 says, High-density residential district is intended to provide the densest residential development that is appropriate for Blanco. The smaller lots are intended to encourage a variety of housing options, including affordable housing and duplex development under certain conditions and are typically near the city center. So those that are around it are R3, right? Is that right?
To the south of it. The ones that are directly below it are R2.
Page of the next one.
But if we're talking about city center, I mean, he's almost as close to the city center as property gets.
Okay, so right now, the ones that are around it are R2.
To the south and to the north of it, there's also R3 touching it to the southwest.
Where are we seeing the R2s? I'm sorry.
The green to the bottom of the property.
Those small ones in that area right there. Like those were the small, 5 acre per unit. They were 5 units per acre were those little green ones.
Correct.
And that's existing.
Yes.
The maroon all around it was
3 per acre.
3 units per acre. And the R1 would have been 1 unit per acre.
Yes.
And so that is certainly more than 1 acre.
Sure. But I'm also saying proximity wise, it is touching in R3, it's touching in R5. By a lot of our definition, it would be acceptable for development. I'm not saying that I'm not able to listen to y'all's opinion. I'm just saying if we're talking about what part of the town makes sense, on paper, that makes sense.
Yeah,
If I just look at the amount of proximity to R3 is this line here. This is the line where it is R1, the proximity here, R2. And I think the longest adjoining properties are towards R2. So it would make sense to make this property also R2, given the thought process.
But an R2 can touch an R3. I mean, that's not like if that would have been an R3, it would be touching an R5, it would be touching an R2 and an R3. So I can just understand it from the owner's perspective by the definition of how we would define what would be zoned appropriate. It does make sense. But that's just my opinion. So.
What does yellow?
Observe is it either R2
What
or
was your objection again, Matt? What did you say that you thought your property should be zoned to?
I know y'all have been on this for 2 years or better, and I've been to several of the meetings, but between then and now, there's added a piece of property. This right here, if anybody remembers Bobby Corvette, that's another 4 acres that they wanted. They called me, I'm going a long story short, but they wanted to build apartments on it. I didn't want to have apartments, they want to put 300 units on there and I didn't want to do that. So me and the bank said, let's marry and buy the place. So now I have the 4 acres there. What I'd like to do is either do R2 or R3, because an R1 in your definition states that it's supposed to be in a rural area, and I'm not in a rural area, so I don't really think R1 fits. The definition says if you're outside, you may or may not have get infrastructure from the city. I mean, utilities from the city, etc. I really don't think R1 fits me.
What about those across the street from you? Do you want to change all of that?
I don't want no more. I got too much property. I don't want to buy nothing.
My question to you is, you're saying that yours is not far enough out for it to be an R1. What about those directly across the street from you? Do we change those also? And let the whole thing change?
I'm not going to argue for them. I'm here for my point, because your definition says R1 is outside farthest from the center of the city, whereas R2 and 3 basically are near the city.
So what if it was R2? I mean, y'all already said that would make sense for y'all.
Okay,
I think the streets there, the streets there kind of add a good. I mean, you got 2 different zones, but I always feel like you need to make a change at the street. Or at the back end.
Makes sense.
Chris?
Well, I thought when we were doing this map, we mapped what was there now and then tried to find the most appropriate category that described it.
That's right.
And because there's just one dwelling, quote, dwelling, if I'm not mistaken, on that lot, that's why it's considered R1. It's not
It
necessarily.
was residential before. We didn't change it from being residential.
No, but before the old maps, you know, you
You could see everything.
were residential mixed. Remember? You weren't 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You were just all residential.
Right, everything was residential.
So
So we went out and just further clarified what was now existing in the residential areas. And because it was just that one, quote, dwelling complex on that one lot, that fit the description of an R1.
Right, there's one property on that, on one unit, one resident on that property, which is why it went to an R1.
okay, but
It wasn't like, if you're living right next to it, there's more than one property there. But the whole point was that was,
well, actually, there's the whole property right now has 3 houses on it.
Because of the new parcel you purchased, you mean?
But one house there, and then next to my original house is there's one that's about 100 years old that I'm at.
So there's 2 dwellings on your property?
Yes,
Okay,
so that property, that house is right next to you is an additional residential property that someone is living in or you're renting.
correct.
So if you're renting it, then you should have a permit to rent.
I don't know, is there a permit to rent houses now?
But when you're on residential property, I'm not sure, but I have to go look at that from the city council. Can anybody rent a property? I mean, we can't ask, I'm just gonna be kind of question and answer. I guess the councilman, okay, thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we need to decide how we want to have it. This isn't a question and answer, we just allow them to speak.
Yeah. So let me ask this. Currently, before this zoning map changes, he's essentially zoned to have 5 houses per acre right now, right?
It was zoned as RR.
Yes.
What happened
Which
is,
could have up to 5 houses per acre.
From 1 to 5.
Okay, so by changing this zoning map the way we have, we are essentially, as it stands right now, we have changed his property from being able to have 5 houses per acre to now it shows 1 house per acre.
And we did that with everything that was there before.
For sure,
I mean, it's not just his property. Let's make sure we understand what we're talking about.
yes, I wanted to make sure that we're all in agreement on that. So by this map changing, his personal property is being changed from 5 per acre to 1 per acre. Now, if he's good with the R2, I think that fits that space. I mean, and if it makes him happy, it makes the map make sense.
Okay, we're still changing it. I mean, what you're saying is, do we want to change it from R to R1 or R2 or R3 or whatever? That's what you're saying. And you prefer it to be an R2, is that correct?
I'm saying the way that this is written, we are changing what somebody is capable of doing on their own property that they currently own. And so,
From 5 houses to 2 houses.
currently it's to 1 per acre. And so I just want to make sure that, that conversation is had. That
You want to change it from 5 to 2 instead of 5 to 1, because that's what you're asking.
No, it's right now it's set as 1 per acre is what our proposed change is. I'm saying for him, his property, the way he can use it has drastically changed because of the zone. So if he's comfortable with it being an R2, then that would make sense for the place it is. That would make the property capable of doing what it sounds like he wants to do with it.
I would agree with that line of reasoning.
I need to get a directive here if we can change a property. Because what we did before is we changed an error on the 2014 map to agree to an ordinance. We have not changed anything from the overall zoning of the property. So I'm waiting for a directive from city administration if we can change a property that was included in the entire citywide zoning.
And I have the answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Ms. Chair, Commissioners. So I have talked to one city attorney and now our city attorney, and you and I were in the same meeting with him when we discussed sending out notice I had the idea to send them out the utility bills, you remember that? And so the reason that I wanted them sent out by utility bills so that you did have this flexibility. And so they were sent out, they were received, and so you can do whatever you want to do now that everybody's been noticed.
Thank you very, very
You're
much.
welcome. I just wanted to get you the correct answer.
Thank you very much. So now I think it makes lots of sense to me. Before it didn't, because we
Okay.
couldn't go back and change a property and void the whole thing. That's what's concerned.
In my mind, somebody that owns a very valuable piece of property in a close proximity to downtown that has ideas of what they want to do with that property shouldn't necessarily be punished by the way we change zoning. That was my point.
Okay. So I will have to ask.
I have a difference of opinion, and I'm not going against the use. I'm just saying, we went out there and presented what was there and then tried to make it comport to the appropriate district. So because at the time, we thought there was just one dwelling, here I'm supposed to, because I thought there was just one dwelling on that lot, I thought R1 would be appropriate. If you're now telling me that you live there and you rent other dwellings on the property, then that would change it, I think. But my point is, why can't you at a later date come back and request an R1 be changed to an R2? And then you could just go, I mean, whoever's going to develop it will have to do the plans anyway. We're not forbidding you from doing that. I'm just saying, this is just a starting point because this is what's there now. So, and that's my understanding of what we're doing. And anyone can come in and ask to change the zoning on a piece of parcel, but right now we're just clarifying what's there. And so that we'll know where we're going from here. That's my perspective from for what it's worth.
But I still think, that looking at this map, this blue chunk of land is very close to downtown. Previously, the property owner had the flexibility of going from 1 to up to 5 homes per acre. He chose only to use it for 1 residence or 2 residences, these 13, that large piece of land. But he could have just as easily have put on there 25 homes, and then we would have said, okay, it has 25 homes on it, therefore it is our, whatever, our 2 or our 3.
Correct.
I think overall, it just makes a lot more sense to have that entire block between those 2 streets being zoned R2, and Mr. Herndon is agreeable to that. I think it even makes more sense, so. I would have had difficulty saying R3, but R2, I think makes a lot of sense, makes that entire area the same color, the same use.
And does that comport to our comprehensive master plan?
Well,
Yes.
part of it gave us the charge to find places where growth would make sense. That's a space where it seems like you could put some homes in where development would make sense.
Or suppose Matt chose to knock down the buildings and put up a mansion. I'm just saying, what's there now is what's there now.
Yeah.
And at any point, someone could come back to change it. We're not forbidding anyone from changing it. We're just saying that's what's there now. And because that's what we were doing when we walked the city streets to identify how the current residential properties were being used.
I think
Yeah.
walking the streets and zoning it the way y'all did made sense, but I think with the conversation we've had, changing it now makes sense as well.
And we can, because now she's told us we can do this, and so that's a good thing. So I
Fine with me.
want to know, is there any more discussion?
No.
Okay, so can I hear a motion on this property?
I will make a motion to change it from R1 to R2.
Do I hear a second?
That was the second time.
Any discussion? Any further discussion?
I call the question.
Everybody in agreement?
Yeah, I think you have to call the
Yes.
roll.
Each name.
You have to call the roll.
Do the roll call again?
Okay. Okay, we'll do a roll call again. Yeah.
Well, we're calling you guys, give it to us earlier.
We're just being extra careful.
Brandon,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes,
Roach,
Yes.
Moore, yes. So it passes unanimously. So that's not, and, okay. Craig's already got it changed. Thank you, Craig. That's why I'm going to. Okay, so now I'm going to ask this. It looks like, cool. Okay, so now, just to make sure that we're all in agreement for the entire map, I want to hear a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission approves the 2021 proposed map as amended. I need a motion.
I second.
I need a first motion, not a second.
That's right, that you said.
I didn't know.
You're making a motion. Sorry,
I
that
will make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve the proposed map
As amended.
as amended.
I second that.
Any discussion? All in agreement? All approved?
Each name.
Roll call. You're not gonna let me off there. Okay, Anderson,
In favor.
Perkins,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Roach,
Yes.
Moore, yes. Passed unanimously.
Did we want
Do I
to,
hear a motion to adjourn?
did we want to address the questions from Callan, or is that not something?
No,
we can-
that's not on the agenda tonight. We can't do that.
Okay.
So do I hear a motion?
So moved. Adjourn.
I move to adjourn and Morris seconded.
Right.
Any more discussion? All in agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
Can we do it that way?
7:20.